Welcome to Law 531, 631 here at Missouri State University, and it's a class that we call Labor Law and Employment Discrimination. And for this session, this is just kind of an introduction to the class itself. It's not an introduction to the topics or to any particular topic, but just to the overall class. If you were at the first class opening, you will see some of this stuff repeated, but it's always a good idea to hear it again. If you weren't at the first class opening, then this will be new to you, and so pay attention, because I think it'll be helpful as you understand what this class is about and kind of the direction of this class. As I mentioned, this is Law 531, 631. If this is a class that you're not supposed to be in, you may want to tune out right now. But my name is Greg Groves, and I am the instructor for this class. In this class, it is a 500 level class, although on some aspects it's more like a 100, 200 level class, in the sense that there are so many topics to cover in employment and labor law that we can't give all of the attention that we need to any particular subject. So from that standpoint, it's more like a 100 or 200 level class where you don't get into as much in depth as you might otherwise. On the other hand, it is like a 500 or a 600 level class to the extent that there will be a lot of work in this class and a lot of application. By the time you get to the point that you're taking 500 or 600 level classes, and I think by the time you're ready to graduate, you ought to be able to apply what you learn. And so, as you will see from time to time, I'm going to give you that opportunity to take some of the subjects we've discussed and apply them and show me that you know what you're doing or that you know how to apply them. I'm excited about this class. I've taught this class for several years, and what I particularly like about it, when I give reviews, it's not always about the way I teach or whatever, and I think that'll be different this time. But what I do like about it is, almost without fail, I get something from somebody that says, this is something I will use the rest of my life. And as an instructor, that's one of the greatest compliments that we could have. And so I think I can promise you that if you'll pay attention to the lectures and read about the stuff as we go from week to week, that when you get done and you look back on your college courses, not so much me, but the subject itself, you'll go, I learned that while I was at Missouri State University, and that's a class that I'm going to be able to use for the rest of my life. And I believe that. And we'll talk about some of those classes in just a few minutes and look at what we'll be covering in this. A little bit about myself and why I think I'm qualified to teach this class is I was in fact a student at Missouri State several years ago, went on to the University of Missouri Law School at Columbia, where I was on law review, note and comment editor. And even during my tenure here at Missouri State, I worked for a local law firm by the name of Lowther Johnson. When I graduated from University of Missouri Law School, I came back and worked at the law firm of Lowther Johnson, Attorneys at Law, and was there, started out as a person who ran errands, made deliveries, was for all practical purposes a gopher, but eventually became a partner in that firm and the managing member of that firm. And so a lot of the information comes while I was a managing member of the Lowther Johnson Law Firm. 2012, I had the opportunity to switch directions in my career. I was presented with an opportunity to go be a senior vice president and general counsel for John Q. Hammond's Hotels and Resorts, and that is where I am now. And that experience also comes into some of the topics that we talk about. John Q. Hammond's Hotels and Resorts manages 78 hotels across 24 states and nearly 8,500 to 9,000 employees. So when you're talking about employment law, we see enough situations at my office to understand how they relate. And hopefully we can relate day-to-day examples, whether it be from my current position or past positions, of how employment law really does affect you on a regular basis. With that in mind, let's talk just briefly about some of the classes that we'll be covering. in this. Like I said, today is just an introduction to 531, 631, what to expect from that in general. But then as we get into it, we're going to talk, like in our first class, about an introduction to employment law. Why we look at employment law. Why is employment law important? It's more than just something that you're sitting there, or should be more than something that you just sit there and go, okay, I got to get through this to get a grade in order to get this particular degree. It's my hopes, it's my desire that you'll be looking at this class going, ooh, I can learn that, I can apply that, I can use that, or I know somebody who can. So we'll talk about employment law, why it's important. In order to do that, we're going to look at cases that are decided by judges. And so to give a little background there, we'll spend 1 week looking at the anatomy of a lawsuit, or one class period, looking at the anatomy of a lawsuit. We'll look at litigation and arbitration and mediation. Probably one of the most important topics we'll cover is who is an employee. If you're going to talk about employment law, you got to know who the employee is. So we'll spend time talking about who is an employee, the employment at will doctrine, and things of that nature. And then we'll get into, among other topics that we may cover, we'll get into some pretty interesting topics. We'll get into privacy in the workplace, computer screening. Can your employer look at your computer? Can your employer look at your emails? What about drug testing? What about background checks? We'll look at those particular things. We'll talk about restrictive covenants. Can an employer make you sign an agreement that says you won't go to work for some other competitor, even if you're fired or even if you decide to go on your own, that you won't go look at somebody else? We'll look at the Occupational Safety and Health Act. We'll look at the Employment Retirement Income Security Act. We'll look at the Family Medical Leave Act. We'll look at the Fair Labor Standards Act. At some point, they may just be acronyms that don't mean anything to you, but by the time this course is done, I think you'll have a pretty good understanding of each of those laws and how they apply. We'll look at Cobra, which may become important to all of you if at some point you have a job, you have insurance through that job, and then you lose that job. Or you're married to somebody who has a job where you get health insurance and you lose that job. How does Cobra come into play? And then we'll spend a great deal of this class looking at discrimination and all types of discrimination. We'll look at race discrimination. We'll look at gender discrimination, age discrimination, national origin discrimination, religious discrimination, disability discrimination. And then finally, we'll conclude this class with a subject on labor unions, how labor unions came about, pressure tactics that both the employer and the union may use to get their way. We'll talk about collective bargaining between a union and a particular employer, and then we'll talk a little bit about public sector unions. So I think there's plenty in this class to apply to all of you at some point throughout your life, and hoping that this class, like I said, is more than just a class where you come in and you have to get credit. With that in mind, and knowing that most of you will tell me at the beginning class that you're here to get credit, let me tell you how you can do that and how you can get the most credit out of this class. This is being taught, at least for me, the first time as an iTunes U course, and so that's a little bit different. And I think there's some good things about that. I think the most positive thing about the iTunes course is that you have the freedom to watch lectures whenever you want. You have the freedom to do whatever you want at your time schedule. And I think that's the greatest advantage of an iTunes U course. If you ask me what the greatest disadvantage to an iTunes U course, I would tell you the same thing. It's the freedom that you have. So let me caution you with this, and I'll try to help you prompt you as we go along. But that freedom, if you don't apply it and aren't disciplined, it could come back to hurt you in the long run. But with that freedom, it's important to stay up on classes as they go along. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to take one class just like you would at if you were taking a regular 3-day-a-week class and watch it 1 hour on Monday, 1 hour on Wednesday, 1 hour on Friday. It doesn't have to be that way at all. But I urge you and would tell you there is no way you can do well in this class if you try to watch all of the lectures the night before an examination. So I urge you to just pay attention to lectures and make sure you get a time schedule as you go along. I also want to urge you just very briefly there. I do incorporate some PowerPoints as the lecture is going along, trying to find this happy medium between listening to me lecture and being able to see something. But let me share with you, I'm not a big PowerPoint fan, and you cannot get higher than a C probably in this class if you rely only on the PowerPoints. So don't assume that you can go to the PowerPoints and watch them and you'll know everything you need to know, because that's simply not the case. That is a resource that will be available to you. The lectures are a resource that will be available to you. Other resources include the text, and we use a text called Labor or Employment and Labor Law. Specifically use the 8th edition of that text, although the 7th edition probably wouldn't hurt, but we are using the 8th edition of that text. That text is authored by Patrick Sihon and James Castacanera. It's a good text. We don't follow it starting at page 1 and ending at the end of the book, so we scatter it out. So pay attention to the syllabus and it'll give you the readings. But it is a book that is required for this class. If you can't find it at the bookstore or you don't want to pay that for it, there may be a way of getting on the website for that particular book and renting it. There's certainly other kind of options that you can look at. So as far as those resources to you, you'll have the lectures, you'll have the PowerPoints that are incorporated within the lecture, you'll have the textbook, you'll have a syllabus, and that syllabus is available to you throughout the year. And then you'll have Blackboard, and I rely heavily on Blackboard to communicate with you, and so for you to communicate me. Or with me. So look forward to all of those resources being available to you. The other thing I want to say about this class, the one thing I will miss in doing this as an iTunes U class as opposed to a lecture situation, is the interaction with students. Even though this is an iTunes U course, I cannot emphasize enough that it is my goal as an instructor to make sure the people that I interact with succeed. And I want you to succeed in this class. To that end, I am available. I'm available by phone. I'm available by email. If you don't understand something, make sure you call me up. Make sure you tell me that you're having a particular problem. The only other thing I would tell you about this class, and everything else is going to be on the syllabus, and I'll let you read the syllabus. The only other thing that I would tell you about this class is that we do what I call weekly readings or weekly questions. That in part is to keep you up, to make sure that you don't abuse that freedom and that you don't get forced into a situation where you're just reading at the last minute. But every week, what I ask my students to do, even in this course, is to send me a particular question about the readings or about the lecture that they don't understand. And so as you go through this, if we're talking, for instance, a particular week, employment at will, I don't want a question that says, well, hey, in that particular class period, did you talk about employment at will? No, I want to see a question that tells me you've read it or you've watched the lecture and that something about it you don't understand or you would like clarified, or even a question that you have, how does this apply in this situation? The whole idea about learning is to think and to understand and then to be able to apply. And so as you'll see on the syllabus, and I'll make those very clear on the syllabus, I want weekly questions to which I'll respond to and which we may share with the group. But we'll work out the details of that as we go along through the semester. But you can't expect that as being part of your grade as reflected on the syllabus. Overall, I think this is going to be an exciting time. I think it's going to be an exciting semester. Use your freedom well. It's a great way to learn, and but also take advantage of the fact that I'm there for you, to help you and to assist you in whatever way that I can as you learn from your time here at Missouri State University. Thank you.